Hello. Life has changed so much in the last 2 to 3 decades. I look at our children's lives and I realise that they are living in a vastly different society to the one that I grew up in. There are so many different influences and changes. In recent times, society has changed and vocabulary in 2020 includes terms and phrases that have inferred something very different even in 2019. For example, a year ago a bubble was simply a fun thing that children played with. Furlough was a special holiday for missionaries, and quarantine was simply for pets coming home from abroad. Social distancing, self-isolation and PPE were terms I could only hazard a guess at their meaning, and who ever really knew who Joe Wicks was? Language that was alien to me as an individual in my second and third decades are commonplace now. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat and YouTube. But these things open up a whole new world, not only for the younger members of our society, but for us all. I've been thinking about this in recent weeks and have had several comments about those who aim to gain followers by their words, actions, fashions. These are social influencers. Influencers in social media are people who have built a reputation for their knowledge and expertise on a specific topic. They make regular posts about that topic on their preferred social media channels, and they generate large amounts of enthusiastic, engaged people who pay really close attention to their views. Brands love social media influencers because they can create trends and encourage their followers to buy products they promote. According to a survey in January 2019, We Are Social, 3.484 billion people actively use social media. That's 45% of the world's population. Inevitably, people look to social influencers in social media to guide their decision making. So why am I talking about social influencers? As one of my children kindly pointed out to me, "Mum, you hardly even engage with social media platforms." And that's true, they're right. I currently don't, but I'm not against them. I just don't have the time to spend surfing the net, tweet or blog. However, I'm on the cusp of retirement and potentially will have some more time, so who knows. Seriously though, at this point, I'm trying to discern what God's will for my future may look like. I don't think I'll ever be a social influencer, but I do believe that as a Christian, I should make an impact. My heart's desire is that I want to make a difference, and that's something that God wants for each one of his children to do. As Christians, our call is to follow Jesus' example and live in a way that is often very countercultural to the way that society has developed. Being a Christian should have an impact that far exceeds even the most popular of social influencers. So what has the Bible got to say about Christians having an impact on the society in which they live? In Matthew 5 verse 16 it talks about being the light of the world, making sure that others can see our good works so we can bring honour to God. Galatians 5:22 talks about the fruit of the Spirit being love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness and faithfulness. My goodness, don't we need to see that fruit in our lives and our places where we spend our time day to day. Colossians 3:23 talks about being motivated by working for God and not for men. Galatians 6 verse 2 talks about bearing one another's burdens, supporting others. And Colossians 3 verse 13 talks about actually forgiving one another, acknowledging that God has forgiven us, so we should forgive others. Often these words are so familiar to us that we just don't let them impact our lives as much, but they can help us by living by them to demonstrate God's love to others around. We're all surrounded by people who affect and encourage us in our daily lives. A recent conversation I had struck a chord with me. I was told of a story called Leaf by Nigel. It's a short story written by Tolkien. Nigel is an artist who loves art and wants to paint a huge tree. He starts with an individual leaf and paints this in intricate detail, and he wants to draw every leaf the same. But he soon finds birds in the trees and hills beyond, and then becomes distracted by the gardener who had a sick wife who then he gets Nigel to help with. He never gets to finish his painting. The story is an allegory and inspired by his desire to complete his work Lord of the Rings, which took him about 17 years. Finding the true meaning of what Tolkien intended may never be known, but perhaps it illustrates to us that as we strive to be all we hope to be, we can be easily distracted. Perhaps we'll never get to paint an entire tree or forest, but we can focus on the detail we're able to do. Maybe we are trying to paint a forest when God simply wants us to paint a leaf. Perhaps the distractions we face may be the opportunities that God gives us to help and to serve others. Many of the characters in the Bible faced distractions, and they didn't always get it right. It's easy to focus on aspects of their life and ignore others. Look at David, described as a man of God's own heart. He fought Goliath, he was a great king, and he defeated Israel's enemies. But he also committed adultery with Bathsheba and arranged the murder of her husband Uriah and then tried to cover it all up. Martha loved Jesus dearly, but got cross and frustrated and overwhelmed with household chores, which left her to miss out on quality time with Jesus. I'd like to focus just a little bit more on Noah. Noah was a man of faith and obedience. He did what seemed absurd, but he was obedient because God had commanded him. Jesus teaches that faith is more than an intellectual belief, but it galvanizes us into action. We can know the principles of living out our faith, but knowledge should be demonstrated through action. The story of Noah shows that faith condemns. 2 Peter 2:5 describes Noah as a preacher of righteousness. Noah's lifestyle and holy living showed up the unholy lives of his contemporaries, thus he condemned the world. This is how faith is supposed to work. We are the salt of the earth. Salt is tasty, has antiseptic and preservative qualities. We are also the light of the world. Light exposes and penetrates the darkness. This means that there will be people who instinctively hate people of faith because our choices condemn their lifestyle. But we do need to be careful, as sometimes it can simply be that we're just being picky and irritating. Noah was also an heir to what he never saw. Noah obeyed God, he built the ark, and experienced amazing deliverance. He died not knowing that this wasn't the end of his impact and the story. He had no idea that there would come a time when Jesus, the Son of God, would use his experience as an example of obedience in the midst of a sinful culture, the one Noah knew nothing about. Noah saw God's deliverance, but died without the knowledge that investing and obeying in the invisible God, his example would be celebrated for thousands of years. Noah left a legacy without ever knowing he had. Perhaps we can all reflect on our lives and begin to realise the legacy others have left us. If so, let's be inspired to influence others by our faith. Whenever I go into my local chemist, the lady who works there will comment on my surname and always recounts that dear old lady who worked in the card shop, who always had a kind word or a listening ear for others. What a legacy Grandma left. Sometimes we can serve, give, love, pray and work hard and still wonder whether it's all worth it. We invest in the invisible. Our efforts are not just for the local church, but for the kingdom of God. God may well use what we do, but I've never known him to send an email informing us of what an epic influence we've had. Don't measure the results of what you do by just what you see, but realise that God is able to multiply the effect of your faithful efforts. Keep planting seeds for the kingdom and trust that God will make them grow. I could stop there and say what an inspiration Noah was and how he always got things right, but he didn't. And my Christian experience is similar. There are amazing times when I'm excited by faith, but that's not always the case. The lengthy times of restrictions on our daily lives with the current pandemic may have led to times when our actions or reactions may not be as honouring to God as we'd like. A brief postscript to Noah's story shows an occasion when he got it all wrong. He got drunk and ended up sprawled naked in his tent. However, God chose not to edit these things out of the Bible. God's greats get it wrong too. None of us is perfect, so don't be discouraged if you feel you get things wrong. Don't use others' failures as an excuse for willful sin, but be spurred on to keep going when we're disappointed with our fumbling faith. To conclude, I'd like to share a story with you that illustrates to me how we can be great influencers despite our failures. God's greats aren't perfect. He knows that so well, but won't stop using us. Keep working at your faith. You can be an influence and leave a lasting legacy. The water bearer story. A water bearer in India had 2 large pots, each hung on each end of a pole, which he carried across his neck. One of the pots had a crack in it, while the other pot was perfect and always delivered a full portion of water at the end of a long walk from the stream to the master's house. The cracked pot arrived only half full. For 2 years, this went on daily, with the bearer only delivering 1.5 pots of water to his master's house. Of course, the perfect pot was proud of his accomplishments, perfect to the end for which it was made. However, the poor cracked pot was ashamed of its imperfection and miserable that it was only able to accomplish only half of what it had been made to do. After 2 years of what it perceived to be bitter failure, it spoke to the water bearer one day by the stream. "I'm ashamed of myself and I want to apologise to you." "Why?" asked the bearer. What are you ashamed of?" "I have been able for these past 2 years to deliver only half my load because of this crack in my side. It causes water to leak out all the way back to your master's house. Because of my flaws, you have to do all of this work and you don't get full value from your efforts," the pot said. The water bearer felt sorry for the old cracked pot, and in his compassion he said, "As we return to the master's house, I want you to notice the beautiful flowers along the path." Indeed, as they went up the hill, the old crackpot took notice of the sun warming the beautiful flowers on the side of the path, and this cheered him some. However, at the end of the trail, it still felt bad because it had leaked out half its load, and so again it apologised to the bearer for its failure. The bearer said to the pot, "Did you notice that there was flowers only on your side of the path, but not on the other pot's side? That's because I have always known about your flaw, and I took advantage of it. I planted flower seeds on your side of the path, and every day while we walk back from the stream, you have watered them. For 2 years, I've been able to pick these beautiful flowers to decorate my master's table. Without you being just the way you are, he would not have this beauty to grace his house." So what about you? Do you feel too much of a failure for God to use? I hope you realise through these brief thoughts, God can work in our lives and have a plan and purpose, however inadequate we may feel. We can all be influencers for him. The future feels uncertain, even more so in this time of pandemic. I am challenged to hold on to God during this time, to read his word, to listen how he may prompt me through the words and comments of those around, and look for new opportunities. Many of you have heard of Dougie Doug. It's been 25 years since he wrote the popular Christian song, "We Want to See Jesus Lifted High." Lives of many have been impacted by this. Doug was so excited to see how far the song had gone. He said he felt humbled and touched and moved by the stories of how God had used this. Tributes were paid by a range of different people, and in a response interview, this is what he said. Think, little old me sitting in my office one morning writing a song. Who would have thought that God would do with it what God would do? It struck me, we just need to faithfully do what God would have us do, what he puts in our hearts. So, perhaps we are just little old me sitting at home. Then think, what has God put on your heart? Thank you.